You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hi, Jack.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, so thank you very much. Very nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, tell me what you're doing.
Yes, I'm working on my research for my dissertation. Hopefully, I'll try to do some interviews for a qualitative study regarding corporate venture capital. And my intention is to explore how the investments in CVC may contribute to the search or to achievement of the firm's climate change goals or commitments. For instance, my company is involved in a CVC, and we have 1, 2, and 3 goals to reduce emissions, GHG emissions, and we are trying to invest. We're investing in some high-tech companies such as Boston Metals to search for new technologies or ways of achieving these goals. Of course, CVC would be not the only tool. It will be just one tool in the innovation toolkit of the company. But I think it's worth understanding how it can contribute in what conditions, in what circumstances. So that's the idea. And my target population would be people involved in the ecosystem. So not only CVC and corporations that have CVC, but also some VCs and universities and other investors, maybe even philanthropy, what we call patient capital, those that are trying to invest, because we know that climate change is a very important and global issue. And of course, the company itself won't be able to solve the problems. And I understand that we need a whole bunch of cooperation between companies and all of those involved in the ecosystem. So that's basically the idea.
Yeah, I think I have the idea. I think that historically, venture capital and super angels and angel funds have not been that sensitive to climate change or that issue as baked into a startup. I think that they've had a challenge imagining profitability if some position or positions are allocated for people to be thinking about how the product or service that's being offered can somehow be directed in a way that can produce reduced emissions or can otherwise help with climate change, unless the business itself, like the solar business, is targeted at some type of energy replacement. Obviously, those businesses exist for that very reason. What I think you'd find in Silicon Valley, if you tried to interview, say, the top 50 VC firms or some collection of VC firms, super angel firms, angel groups, because there's a whole infrastructure of different types of investors in Silicon Valley, as well as outside Silicon Valley, in what's in New York is called Silicon Alley, and in Miami is called Silicon Beach, and in Austin, Texas is called Silicon Prairie. I mean, there's certain areas. Boston has Route 128, and obviously spin-offs from MIT and Harvard. But generally, if you probed, and I don't know how many firms you're trying to interview, I think you'd find out that most of them don't have any type of what sometimes is called double bottom line planning, which is how is the business more than just profits? How is the business more than just shareholder value? How is the business, how is the business doing stuff that I think they think is more along the lines of being a B corporation? There's a separate group of corporations in America that are called B, benefit corporations. They're not, strictly speaking, targeted with maximizing shareholder value. So when you start a Delaware corporation as a new entrepreneur, or when you have your lawyer start a Delaware corporation for you, it's typically done as a standard, what's sometimes called subchapter C corporation. And that simply means it's a domestic, private, profit-making corporation, where the theory under Delaware law is that shareholder value is maximized almost to the exclusion of everything else, except, of course, employees and customers, and to some degree, there certainly is respect for other stakeholders, but only to the real extent that it's driving shareholder value. And you'll see some of the Delaware judges writing about how that's a premise of Delaware law. You know, we have 50 different states in the United States. There's 50 different bodies of corporate law. Some of them track Delaware, some of them don't. But none of them, to the best of my knowledge, have baked in the view that the startup is supposed to have an account the sustainability of what it's doing and whether it's essentially taking away from the environment or protecting the environment. Now, at the same time, there's recognition, certainly on Wall Street and elsewhere, that various ESG types of principles should be baked into the corporate charter almost from the inception of the business. So because that's not been historically the case, most venture capital folks don't really consider it. Now, you could consider it as part of what might be called marketing. Like you could consider it's important from a marketing point of view that it not be the case that the business is viewed as a polluter or that the business is otherwise taking away from the environment or it's otherwise engaged in toxic torts or engaged in things that could generate litigation. So that there's sensitivity around that. But I haven't seen, and I guess you can search online to see if you can find on any of the websites for any of the venture capital firms, I guess you could compile from Crunchbase. That's one of the places you can compile, crunchbase.com. You could compile all of the venture firms because some of them have gone out of business during the pandemic. Some of them have not raised new funds. So you can compile like the top 100 venture capital firms throughout the United States and maybe even compile the top 100 super angel groups, almost like a venture firm, but typically smaller funds, or 100 private investors for that matter. And I think you wouldn't find a single website. It'd be an interesting test if you could get AI help to do it, where you look at the entire website collection. Is there a single one that emphasizes protecting the environment? Now, there are some categories of funds that talk about double bottom line, and they probably do mention something along the lines of what you're studying. And there was a student, I don't know if she's graduated yet, but there was a student, I'm trying to remember her name, who did previously work for a double bottom line venture fund. And she eventually took a job at some tech company, I forget which it was, but she took a job at a company that wanted to have her do work in sustainability and in this double bottom line thinking. And I just can't remember her name, but I'll try to find her name and I'll forward you her name because she probably would be a good resource to talk to about what's going on in this area. How many interviews are you trying to carry out?
Well, actually, I need at least 20. And the problem is I don't have that much contact in the ecosystem. So that's why I reached out to you, because I know you're very connected and maybe you could help me get at least some of them.
Well, these people are very busy and they don't really want to get on the record. So you have that problem. I think they don't want attribution. That's a second problem. I'm sure if you sent a survey instrument out, most of them would ignore it. I'm sure you can get the names. I'm sure if you go to crunchbase.com, you can get the names and you can get the contact information. That's easy.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I have access to PitchBook, which is similar to Crunchbase, and they have all the contact information. But of course, if I just sent a cold email, I wouldn't get any answer, I guess.
Did you buy an actual account on that service? Did you actually?
Well, actually, my company already has an account, so I have access.
Okay.
I used to work for the implementation of this CVC fund, so that's why I know how to use it. But it's all about relationship, right? But I agree with you that most of VCs are pretty much focused on financial returns and shareholder value. But for instance, some of them are more focused on climate tech. I have information that the investment in climate tech are increasing a lot. So my focus would be to talk about those kinds of funds like Breakthrough Energy, those guys that are more focused on technology or vertical, so to speak.
Right, but I think that's a pretty skewed group of people, right? I mean, that's the people that might be more interesting to study and more accessible would be the various incubators. And because they're the feeders, like Y Combinator is one, 500 startups is another. There's a bunch of them that you can find on PitchBook or on Crunchbase. I'm sure they would be more willing to say what they're doing. They probably are more open, trying to understand where this is going. And, there's quite a lot of them now. I think there's like over 500 of these incubators around. They're in different forms in different places throughout the US. And I do think that you could probably get some number of them to go sort of on the record, as it were, to give you more information, because I do think they would be more likely to. The VCs are so wealthy and so unwilling to really spare in real time.
I know.
I would doubt. But
that's a good idea. Yeah, I think you gave me a very good idea. I haven't thought about those people.
Yeah, you could find them. Y Combinator, Techstars, 500 Global, Mass Challenge. There's a bunch of them. Free. You can go on Crunchbase for free and just check the box that says, I just want to focus on accelerators. Another worthy thing is check the box to say, I just want to focus on angel investors and see what these angel investors are thinking. And there are lots of them that are listed. These are individuals mainly. And some of them, like Mark Cuban, he's a pretty busy guy, pretty wealthy billionaire, but he's invested in lots of companies. And look, another interesting thing to think about, and I wonder what the data would disclose, but there's a TV program called Shark Tank in the US.
Oh, yes, I know.
And in the UK, it's called Lion's Den. Shark Tank was sort of derivative of Lion's Den, and both of them, I think, are still on the air. It would be a really interesting piece of data as to the number of people they put on the show and how many have anything to do with what I'll just broadly say is some sort of ESG component to their startup. Just taking that data will give you some indication of what they really think is newsworthy or what they think is investment worthy, because they're obviously seeing thousands of business plans and they're selecting for TV, whatever number they do per year, call it, 100 or 200. I bet it's like less than 5% that have any component in the area of sustainability. But it would be interesting because, look, the problem in part, and it's been identified in the literature, and it's probably worth you finding that literature and researching it, is the corporate identity in the US is meant to serve shareholder value almost regardless of the destruction it makes in the environment. If you can make profits drilling another oil field legally, there's all these regulations, obviously, to do it. But if you could do it, there's no part of the corporate charter in Delaware, or for that matter, any of the other 49 states, that would say, well, you can't do this without putting in some sort of sustainability component, some sort of carbon credit, something else. There's nothing from a corporate law point of view. And if anything, the corporate law goes the other way. It goes almost 180 degrees the other way. Now, someone may correct me and say, well, that's starting to change. And I would say, yes, it started to change when this new class of corporation called the B Corporation was introduced, designed to say, as between shareholders and other initiatives, shareholders do not need to be first. Other initiatives can be put first. So, for example, Illy Coffee, ILLY, a famous coffee company from Italy. They have a big footprint in Italy as well as in the United States. They're a B corporation, and they have sustainability baked into their business in terms of where they buy coffee and making sure that they're buying from suppliers that aren't taken advantage of. And all of those issues are present. So I think that's part of the reason that if you did get through to the higher level of a collection of random VC spokespeople, I'm not sure that they would say this is something that's on their mind at all, or that it should be, for that matter.
There are actually research saying that financial results are actually negatively correlated with the efforts for reducing emissions. So it's like going against the shareholder value, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's part and parcel of headcount. Like now they hide to some degree headcount in this area into marketing. And you could argue there's a bit of greenwashing that goes on as a result of that. But it's not like we have yet reached a point where what I'm broadly calling ESG, is something, environment, sustainability, governance, is a big part of corporate thinking. Now, it's starting to change, I think, to some degree.
Yes.
The ETFs, exchange traded funds, talk about the only stocks we'll invest in are those that have some sort of statement of ESG principles or some sort of double bottom line approach. Whether those ETFs will actually go anywhere is a really interesting question, but it is a marketing differentiator to be able to say, well, our ETF fund only has clean companies in it, or only has green companies in it. I mean, look, so far, this new green movement in the US, which is part of the Democratic Party and is viewed as very left of center, has not gotten traction at all, even though there have been, lots of players on TV saying we must do something, we have to do something. Obviously, climate change is real. You can't deny it. And these storms and the degree of heat that we've had here in the US and other things that people are observing are real tangible outcomes. I mean, there was major flooding in New York this weekend, and people are starting to say, Jesus, this is real. This is really making a difference, right?
Yeah. Yes, I agree. This is an increasing trend. I don't think it has gotten traction yet, but I think it's increasing. The need for disclosure, the ESG component for performance. So I think it's an increasing trend.
Yeah, I think the bigger question would be, how does a founder, we see a lot of companies right at the very founding of the company, how does the founder think about integrating some aspect of ESG into the business plan in a way that doesn't put off the venture capitalists and angel investors who say, oh, this person is a left-wing Green Party enthusiast. She or he are never going to actually promote maximizing shareholder value. So we should stay away from him or her. And that's a real issue. I think there are people that worry, even if their sentiment is, I'm going to start this with the view of giving 10% of the profits to fill in the blank. I think there's a lot of resistance where VCs will say, well, that's 10% of the profits that would carry a multiple that would add to shareholder value because the profits get some multiple, call it 10x. So if you're going to give away $10 million of profits, you're giving away $100 million worth of enterprise value on a company that maybe it's worth 900 million, and you would argue that it should be worth a billion. And they'd rather be a member of the billionaire club than say, oh yeah, we gave $100 million back to society because that's in our long-term interest. They would say, let charity have its role post, after whatever profits are made, let people sort of like lawyers doing pro bono work. Some people like me do pro bono work. Other people are like, I'll just pay something to some community service organization instead of doing the pro bono work myself. So there's two very different views about how one contributes back to society. So I think you're going to run into that in the interviews if you can get candid interviews. I mean, there's obviously the difficulty of self-selection. If people agree to do it, do they come to the interview with kind of an agenda, more or less?
Yes, that's also an issue.
But I think of it more along the lines of, look at the companies that actually go public. Let's forget about the interviewing and try to look at the more objective data of the companies that are being funded and the companies that go public. And just forget about interviews, because that can be made up stuff that just makes the VC firms sound like, apple pie and 4th of July celebration, mom and apple pie. Look at if you could, I mean, this is where my head goes. If you're trying to look at maybe even through the pandemic years, which obviously emphasize that we live in a world where if it's too crowded and if there are too many issues, we may end up with more than one pandemic. I think this is actually pandemic number 6 in the last 100 years. I read recently, this is the 6th pandemic. I had never focused on it, but if you go back 100 years to the original pandemic of note back in 1918, we've had 5 others after it, of which this one is the latest, or the 6th. So that means basically every 15 years or so, we should expect to have some sort of pandemic. And probably more often than that, as the world has gone from 3 billion to 9 billion people, the vessel almost can't carry the load of people that are on the planet. 9 billion people, probably by 2030, I think is what the estimate is, with India growing even larger than China. So somewhere in this, if you look at the companies that go public, and you might even compare them with the companies that go public in India versus the companies that go public in China, how many of those companies actually have some type of ESG mission or ESG component to it? I don't think you'll find very many at all. And that's very objective data that you can get, at least in the US, off of sec.gov. You can easily pull what's called the S1 filings, the original public offering filings for the last many years, call it the last 5 years. pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, I think you wouldn't find very many at all, but I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but to me, that would be more telling and more objective than what VCs have to say about anything, or even what startups have to say, because I could tell you, startup founders are always out of resources and always in need of more resources, and think anything that's optional at all, just needs to be cut out. So if ESG is part of the marketing, maybe that makes sense. But I can tell you, they're interested in customers, customer acquisition, profitability, where the customer is being served, creating customer value, creating shareholder value, and making the flywheel go faster and faster, regardless of what it's necessarily doing, unless they're running into some legal issue, regulatory issue, potential litigation issue. Then I think that there's a little bit more awareness. So I think you have to rethink, and I'll try to find that woman's name because I think she can help you. And she might have a completely different take, because she did work at a VC firm that did have a bottom line aspect, but there's not that many of those either. If you really search through PitchBook, there's not that many double bottom line VCs where they literally promote the idea that we want to invest in more B corporations, where the corporation has priorities other than just creating more profits and more shareholder value. So I hope that was helpful for you.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you very much for the lecture. I think it was really, really interesting. And let me know if you remember this person, this lady, because I think it would be really, really nice to talk to her.
Right. I'll find her and send you an invite on LinkedIn. You should send me your LinkedIn contact, and I'll and then I'll say to her that she should talk to you because you're doing good work. So congratulations. I hope you're successful. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jack.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.